Hi, I'm Joan Weber with the Center for Ministry Development, and I'm very excited to welcome you to our webinar on living and sharing the Encuentro. And I would like to begin, first of all, by thanking you for spending this hour with us. And I'd like to introduce to you our panel, and I'll have each one of them share their role. And I'm going to start with our guest panelist, Marilyn Santos.
Good afternoon. Hi, Joan. Thanks for the invitation. I am Marilyn Santos, and I am currently serving as the Associate Director for the Secretariat of Evangelization and Catechesis at the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops.
And Marilyn, what's one hope that you have that will come out of the fifth Encuentro?
I think that's actually an easy question, so thanks for asking, is that the fifth Encuentro isn't over. And certainly the national event wasn't over, that if anything, we're only halfway there, and that this is something that we're going to continue living and developing and breathing and growing from for a long time.
That's cool. Thank you, Marilyn. Tom East, our director, is also going to be a panelist. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom East, coming to you from Gig Harbor, Washington, where it's a beautiful sunny fall day. And I'm the director of the Center for Ministry Development. A hope that I've had for the Encuentro, and really a prayer over the process, has been that we would really move as a church of the United States to a new place of the way that we think about our brothers and sisters. In reading over some of the documents, even renewing the vision and things from the last couple decades, sometimes there's this whole emphasis on welcome, and especially how do we welcome the minority. And we've moved beyond this idea of thinking about minorities, especially with young people, considering that this is the Hispanics are the majority of youth. But I think also this idea of welcome is that then it's my home and I'm welcoming you. And I think that we need to move to a new paradigm where we're really thinking about a meeting place where we all bring our gifts. And I think it reminds me of what Arturo Chavez talked about during the Encuentro about, the fact that, what is the Hispanic community looking for? They're not looking for a parallel church. They're not looking for a chance to say, well, now it's our turn, but they're not looking they're definitely not looking for assimilation, but they're looking for a place to bring gifts and looking for full integration and inclusion. And I think that's my hope, that this, I think youth ministry and ministry with jóvenes can lead the way to where churches can be new. But I think it's a new moment for us as a church in the United States.
Thanks, Tom. And our third panelist will be Angel from our staff.
Wonderful. Hi and welcome, everyone. My name is Angel, and I'm a project coordinator of Youth Ministry Services with the Center for Ministry Development. And I'm one of the hopes that I have for the process of what we're doing through this Quinto Encuentro is this opportunity for renewal. I think, and I hope that all of us are challenged by the process, this pastoral and theological process of asking, what should church look like today? It's in light of our pastoral response to the needs of the young people, of the families, of these communities that are entering into our communities or have already been present for decades and decades, and a question of how do we respond and be challenged by that personally, but also as an organization, our youth ministry, our parish culture, as a diocese, as a national church, just all of these things. To just really leverage this as a time to be renewed in our ministry efforts.
Thanks, Angel. And our prayer leader and question fielder today will be Susan Searle from our staff. Susan?
Hello, everyone. So we're helping to lead prayer today. I'm glad to be here with you all. And I too see the Encuentro as a way to help our church grow and just move in a new direction. So I'm glad to be with you all today.
Thanks, Susan. And I'm Joan Weber. I'm a project coordinator and especially work with our mission trip for high schoolers, Young Neighbors in Action. I think that a hope for today is, first of all, that we have a better understanding of what Encuentro is, and secondly, why it's relevant for all of us, not just parishes named Our Lady of Guadalupe, but for all of us, and thirdly, some practical strategies we can take with us from the webinar. So with that, I would invite Susan to lead us in prayer.
Thank you, Joan. And I'm actually going to have Angel help me a little bit because his Spanish is much better than my Spanish. So we'll go back and forth through a few of our different verses. This is just using the prayer from the 5th National Encuentro and a little bit of an adaptation to that. But just to begin, Encuentro means going out to visit people in their everyday lives. It means observing with the eyes of a disciple and raising awareness about the reality of where people live, especially those who suffer most and who need to hear the good news of Jesus. Encuentro is about sharing our own experiences of encountering the resurrected Christ. So we'll begin our prayer. Angel would move our slide to the next one over. Yeah, there we go. So begin our prayer together by making the sign of the cross in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Dios de infinita misericordia, tú que enviaste a tu Hijo resucitado a salir al encuentro de los discípulos de Maús,
Grant us today a missionary spirit and send us forth to encounter our sisters and brothers.
a caminar junto a ellos en amistad, a escuchar sus tristezas y alegrías con compasión y proclamar tu palabra con valentía, para que puedan reconocerte de nuevo en la fracción del pan.
Pope Francis says, I see that the 5th Encuentro is a concrete way for the Church in the United States to respond to the challenge of going beyond what is comfortable, business as usual, to become a leaven of communion for all those who seek a future of hope, especially young people and families that live in the peripheries of society. Pope Francis says, I hope that after the 5th National Encuentro takes place, it continues to bear fruit, and that the Church, in all of its settings, continues to accompany this process with its own reflection and pastoral discernment.
Envíanos a todos como discípulos misioneros y quédate con nosotros siempre, mientras nos dedicamos a compartir la alegría del Evangelio con generaciones de toda raza, lengua, cultura y nación.
We ask you this with burning hearts, filled with the Holy Spirit. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and through the loving intercession of our Blessed Mother Mary, Our Lady of Guadalupe, star of the new evangelization in the Americas. Amen.
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 In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you so much, Susan. What a beautiful prayer from the Encuentro. Before we get started, I just want to let you know if you have any questions from our very brilliant panel, you can type them in the question box, which should be showing up on the right side of your screen. And if you've minimized it, just type or hit on that orange, the white arrow on the orange background, and that should maximize it again. And you can type in any question, and Susan will be helping us to catch your questions. So I want to start with you, Marilyn. Just if you wouldn't mind giving us an explanation, what is the Quinto Encuentro and why should we care about that?
Sure. Thanks, Joan. Well, the Encuentro, as Susan beautifully shared, it is it's a noun and a verb and an adjective and everything. And more importantly, it wasn't a conference, it's not a workshop. Encuentro actually in this context also means what it's naming is a process. And it's a process of consultation that starts from the grassroots and then goes all the way up on top, which is why this particular process took over 2 years, because it is very intentional that the first encuentros happened at the parochial, at the parish level, and then from there, delegates were chosen to represent. Then we had the diocesan encuentros, same process to the regional, and then from the regional, the delegates were chosen to attend the national event. The main objective of the process of an encuentro is to listen, so that then together we can discern ways that we as Catholics can respond to and as the church. So I know that one of the questions, or maybe a little confusion that sometimes people who were reading about the process was, well, they keep on asking the same questions over and over again. And the answer is, well, yes, we were, because it was very, and that was intentional, so that you would hear on all levels of church what people had to say. And then that's how, in a process of discernment, you can come to what we're calling the conclusions or the pastoral recommendations that really are inclusive of everybody's experiences, and what are the commonalities, recognizing that just as no human being is the same, no diocese, no parish, no experience, so that the conclusions have to always be adaptable to the need. What's interesting, though, and you mentioned it, I think, in one of your hopes for the encuentro, is that while certainly the focus, if that's the word, were Hispanics, and how we respond to the church, the encuentro is for the entire church. So it's really like looking at through the Hispanic or Latino experience of church. How are we as the church, all of us, as a communion of saints, particularly in the United States context, going to respond to the new needs of who the faithful are, and how we can all be better. So I know that even the encuentro, as you see, it's the quinto encuentro, the fifth encuentro, which means that there have been 4 that came before, that this wasn't just so that non-Latinos could learn something new. It's even for those of us who are Latino, have to recognize that whatever the conclusions may have happened in the first, second, third, and fourth encuentro, it's a moment of change and of moving forward, so that, we always hear the same old. That's for all of us across the board to really learn. What it's interesting is that Pope Francis, actually, I had pulled out a quote too, Susan, so we're all the same. What he specifically, and those of us who were lucky enough to be there, actually, I think it's available on YouTube. He sent us that beautiful video that I cried. I thought it was probably one of the highlights. And one of the things that he spoke about the encuentro, he said that the quinto encuentro has also been an instrument of grace that led to a conversion of heart for many people, and above all, to pastoral conversion. And we've already seen the fruits of that. I'm actually here this week. We're meeting with the bishops, and one of the beautiful things that have already come out is that, in spite of some of the rather difficult topics that are being discussed here, the shining light has been sharing about the encuentro, and how that really it has been a model for them of how we as the church need to be in this together, and the solidarity and the sticking together, and that it is family. So that's really, I think, the important thing about the encuentro is that also realize that the national event was not the end. Bishop Nelson Perez actually this morning reminded us that we should really look at the national event as only being 50% of the way there. Mm-hmm. And we've been up the mountaintop, and now we're coming off the mountaintop, and how that's going to happen is in reverse. So from the national event, regionally, diocesan, and then parochially.
You give me goosebumps with all those powerful words, listening and discerning and conversion. That's awesome. Thank you. Angel, could you share with us a little bit about what you learned about the diverse needs and realities of Hispanics and Latinos at the encuentro?
Absolutely. So as Marilyn was talking about, there were parish, diocesan, regional, and then most recently the national gatherings and encuentros that were happening. And so there were different pieces of information that were gathered at all of those events, and they were compiled and shared at this most recent national gathering. And so some of the things that I found noteworthy are coming straight out of the working document that they shared with all the delegates there. And so one of that was about the generational differences. I think this was really helpful, especially as we were talking about very practical implications for youth ministry, is to look at some of this data and say, and wrestle with it and see what it means for us as parish youth ministers. But, one of the things that we're finding is many Hispanic youth and young adults in the United States represent second and third generation Hispanics. And so here in this chart, you'll see that the first three columns representing ages 0 to 13, 14 to 17, and then 18 to 29 are largely his second and third generation Hispanics. So that's represented by that light green and the lightest green there. The darker green is representing the immigrant Hispanic, and that's the largest percentage of that is represented in the 30 to 49-year-olds. So this is, again, affirming, and with other research we're finding, is that Latinos are largely U.S. born. And the U.S. born account for 81% of Latinos under 35 in 2016, compared to 42% of those 36 and older. And so it's just, again, talking about how young our church is and how the generational differences are there. So we know one of the settings, very important settings of doing youth ministry is with families. And so this may, again, represent that mom and dad are the first generation, that immigrant Hispanic, while the sons and daughters of them are more than likely, the young people that are visiting are participating in our masses, part of our confirmation experiences, faith formation, are largely representing second and third. Another, I think, interesting thing that we start approaching when thinking about family ministry and how we're engaging our young people and their parents is looking at as language. This is one of the first things that we end up talking about in regards to doing multicultural ministries, language or and such. But in Hispanic Latino households in 2016, they're largely speaking Spanish at home. But we know that many of the young people speak English very, very well, and that's represented in this other bar chart that we see. So the 5 to 13, 14 to 17, and 18 to 29-year-olds say that they would speak English very well. And there's very, very few of them that would say they don't, and that's what's represented there. So again, those that do not speak English very well would be the 30 to 49, 50 to 60, and older. So again, this is representing a different generation, a different reality, and consequently different pastoral needs in our families that are within our communities. And in this working document, as it was working to synthesize different regional conclusions, it had this to say: due to cultural and linguistic differences among Latino teens, not to mention all other Catholic teens, it is important to open multiple spaces for them to connect and participate. And so I think this was already drawing a very important conclusion, but it's still something that has us wrestle with what does that practically look like. So.
Yeah. And Tom, I think you heard some ways in which it can be lived out practically at the Encuentro and in your own experience. Would you like to share some of that?
I would. Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Angel, for that context. I think part of the ways as Angel and I were participating in the Encuentro on behalf of the staff for CMD, we weren't just looking passively at this event, but we're very actively looking at how does this impact the ministry of the Center for Ministry Development. And one of the questions I had was, how is it that we approach language, especially with Ministerio para Adolescentes, the ministry with the adolescents? And so sitting in those breakout sessions and really just engaging in conversations with ministers who are on the ground doing new things, this impressive group of young adults who are doing ministry was so striking. And so listening to those conversations, I would just really echo what Angel led us off with, the sense of opening up multiple spaces, which reminds me of Alejandro Aguilera Titus talking about how do we create ecclesial space for the variety of people who comprise our communities. It made me think about the way you would sit down with a friend, or that's a peer relationship, or even if you're the confirmation sponsor with a young person. I think the kind of responsiveness in a relationship means that you wouldn't sit down with a friend and they're sharing with you about maybe what they need, what's going on with them, or maybe a challenge that they have, and you're like, oh, well, here's a pre-programmed response to that. Or like, here are the 5 steps. I just got these offline. There's a naturalness and an organic way that we respond in relationships. And I think that's what I heard from these pastoral leaders. So I asked them, I said, well, what do you do about the English and Spanish? What do you find about the language needs of the adolescents you're working with? And so they shared that a lot of times they're doing a lot of the presentation in English, They talked about Spanglish, about where they're going back and forth between the languages, but then they talked about being ready to respond as they needed to. So they said, well, sometimes we're doing something. We have young people who are monolingual, Spanish speaking, and so we have a team of people that are ready to go and they sit with them, and then we find out what do we need to do differently because we now have this community amongst us. So there's a responsiveness and inclusiveness that would be the opposite of making simple assumptions. Oh, all our teens speak English when they're studying math and history, so we'll just do this all in English. But the other assumption we could make is, well, but let's do everything in Spanish because they all speak Spanish. There's this, it's a complex question. And in addition to language, we have to think about spirituality. And we'll talk more about that, within our webinar, but it's not just language responsiveness, it's how is it that we are allowing the cultural symbols and the things that come from language and family to connect in the way we respond. So language is a keystone, but it should just remind us of how complex this is and the complexity of thinking, what's the language of the young people that we're gathering with? But what's the language of their parents? And then if we're in sacrament preparation, what's the language of the sponsors or the godparents? So that and it's a mapping out of those things so we can be as responsive to communities as we are instinctively responsive in one-on-one relationships.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. That does raise the complexity, but also the joy of the youthful Hispanic church. That's awesome. Susan, do we have any questions so far?
No, Jen, we don't have any questions at this moment. But again, if people want to type something in, feel free to do so.
Great. And I'm going to ask Angel to address the issue of leaders and leadership and what the Quinto Encuentro said about that, or what you listened and discerned.
Absolutely. So that was one of the consistent themes and topics of what was shared in almost every keynote address, every panel, every breakout session that was focused on either immigration, jail ministry, young adults and youth, and family ministry. Everything was there was this need to address the fact about leaders and leadership, how to get them, how to cultivate them, what are we looking at? What's the skill set and spirituality and attitude of an effective leader in today's context? And so, some of the things that were coming from the working document. There we go. Was from one of the summaries was naming that we must have more confidence in adolescents and invite them to serve in ministries. Also, let them exercise their leadership within youth ministry. This is something that was very evident. There were a lot of young adult delegates that were there that were invited to special opportunities to share and voice their concerns, the realities that they're experiencing in their different parts of the country. And they want to get involved. They want to animate and help develop and be a part of the solution and the response, this pastoral response to the ministry needs in their community. But sadly, at times, the structural integration was lacking, or sometimes even an obstacle to them even able to exercise their leadership and sharing their giftedness. And by the way, this is a picture of many of the young adult delegates from the Quinto Encuentro gathering that happened recently. But again, from that summary that was coming of the working document, they shared young Latinos who are dealing with serious challenges in life are typically the most abandoned. The parents would like to see more retreats, groups, sports, and mission experiences in which young Hispanics take the lead. So again, it's saying, how are we not just making room to minister to young people, young Hispanics, young Latinos, but rather how do we empower them to be these ministry leaders to help develop these responses that we need to so creatively seek out and develop. So.
Right. And Marilyn, I'd like to toss this question to you, building on what Angel just shared. How can parish youth ministries, particularly any ministries, but particularly youth ministry, how can they cultivate these young leaders, and where would they go? Where would you suggest they look for this type of leadership?
Sure. And before I actually directly answer your question, I just want to go back, Angel. We've been sifting at the conference through, and no surprise, but totally affirm everything that you just said. overwhelmingly across the top, the number one most significant recommendation across all the ministerial areas has been leadership development and formation of Hispanic young adults, including those working with second and third generation, because it's a big point that even among the Latinos in leadership that we've been recognizing and struggling as well for the last couple of years, is that there's that first, second, and third generation. The methodology, the pedagogy does need to be adapted as well. But directly to your question, Joan, I at the risk of sounding flip, when you say, where should they look? They look in your own parish, because a lot of what we find is that a lot of this, what I'm going to call unrecognized or maybe unauthorized even leadership, just because the parish has not officially said you as a leader, it's still happening. You will find that, especially Latino young adults, they are getting together and they are praying together, and they are going on retreats. They are playing all sorts of sports together. It's so something. Look a little deeper, and then I know one of the concepts that has come across with the Encuentro, which is really, really key, is this whole concept of certain people who are gente puente, literally bridge people. And who those are is primarily a lot of the second and third generations. As Angel said, most Latinos in this country, we were born here, and it means that we speak English, and a lot of us are bilingual. So really look for these people in your parishes and just start the conversation. And I really think you'd be pleasantly surprised that we are there. It just takes somebody to actually maybe look a little deeper next time, and then make the investment both with your time, your talent and your treasure. So find out what is it that they're doing, what would they like to see more of. I know that for my many years working in youth ministry as well, I think we would all agree that sometimes one of the biggest topics, I think it's some of the workshops that sometimes get the most attendances. How do I find volunteers? How do I build up my team? And I would say that I'm looking at this slide, is that those parents who want to see all of this, they're just waiting to be asked. They're waiting to be asked, and those bush people are really key. So if the first place to look is look for those people, and again, I'd be really surprised if you didn't find them.
Tom?
Oh.
I'm sorry, Tom, we can't hear you. Okay.
I muted myself in case I would make any noise on this end. And then to hop on to what Marilyn was sharing, one of the things that struck me from being at I think one of the most significant parts of the Encuentro was the dinner between the bishops and the young adults. And at the table that I was facilitating, really almost all of the young adults who were there were working in youth ministry as well. So when they're having the conversation with the bishop, they were talking about their own lives and spirituality, but they were talking as leaders. And what struck me was the one word was access. That it felt to me as though these leaders, as Marilyn said, a lot of times the leadership is organic, it's coming forward, it's not necessarily a designated leader, but they're taking leadership. But sometimes they're not getting the access to the things they need. I mean, the stories I heard about not being able to get space at the parish, or one story about we're able to get space, but we can't use the restrooms. I mean, just really ridiculous things for an energized part of the church that, to me, it feels like it's the key to the re-evangelization of the church in the Americas. Like, how is it that we're not letting leaders have what they need to be successful? So I think for those of us who have some kind of influence, how are we speaking for this leadership so that they have access to what they need? Access to training information, access to resources, access to facilities, access to the conversations where decisions are made. I think access is real important. The other word I would say would be accompaniment. Standing back from this generation of leaders is just to say, how is it we as a church are valuing not just what the Hispanic leaders are doing, but how is it that we are how is it that we're investing in them so that we can see what they would contribute 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now to really move us forward on our evangelization, and not just like go to this program, but how is someone walking with these leaders and taking a personal investment in their spirituality and their life, as well as what they can contribute. And I think that that's a stewardship issue for us as a church. How are we being good stewards of the amazing giftedness of people who are overcoming amazing odds and persisting with just real, strength and diligence? That how is it we're being a good steward of that kind of energy?
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Yeah, if I may just add to a bit of what Tom was saying, I really think that the personal invitation, the personal relationship, and I think the affirmation, something that was commented kind of jokingly, was this attitude of or spirituality of San Juan Diego, just this very loneliness, humility, like, oh, I can't do that, I don't know that, I can't do anything, but really helping empower our young adults, our families, our young people, our youth, our middle school and high school youth, to recognize the giftedness that they have and how they can share that. Many times they've never been affirmed that they, doing what they can do, sharing their lived experience is a gift, and that they can share that. So it's a question of how do we help rise that or help that rise in them so that they can live out their baptismal call. As Pope Francis is asking all of us to be those missionary disciples, we need to do that. So it's less bulletin announcements and more, standing at the front, shaking hands, talking to people, and affirming them and taking interest in their lives and what they want to do and how they want to contribute to the church.
And Tom and Angel, I may add something else. I think what also came up clear that evening was that clearly the young adults who had been chosen to go to the national event had been the ones who were recognized. But two things that they shared with us is, number one is that it was because of the process. So again, I think it's a real good evidence that the giftedness of this process is that it identified new leaders. Or maybe not new leaders in their parish, but certainly those of us who are working on the diocesan or regional or even national level identified new leadership for us. And the other thing that they shared, which again I thought was beautiful, if not heartbreaking, is we were the lucky ones, but they each could tell you like a laundry list of names of other young adults who they felt wanted to give, wanted to participate just as much as they did, but even on the parish level, we're told when the process went there, oh, this isn't for you. Because young adults, even though from the beginning of this, the process very intentionally, and the guidelines that were given were very intentional that a third along the way should be young adults. There were way too many places on all those levels that actually did not allow young adults to participate. So I think we need to be aware of that, because even when the intention is there, even when it's when black and white literally written, there are still places that are just not giving them the space.
That's heartbreaking for sure. But the hope is, like you said, we should seize the day, carpe diem, with all those young adults who are surfacing now to be leaders in our ministries. That's exciting.
Yeah. So, Joan, before you go on, I noticed that Susan can maybe help us. Charlotte McCorkadale has a question that feels related to this leadership topic. I wonder if we could jump into that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the question is, it strikes me that with such diversity that has been named, that the challenge of calling forth and forming ministry leaders with diverse skills and competencies and languages is critical. How is that issue being addressed through Encuentro?
Sure. If I may, I can go. I know that there are some emerging national initiatives, which soon, hopefully very soon, you'll be hearing more about it. But the number one is a leadership initiative is going to be developed specifically for Hispanic young adults and those working with youth and young adults. So, and the nuance there is helping to give those competencies and those skill sets and those, again, pedagogical frameworks so that both are being attended to. I know the timeline is, this is being fast-tracked, and not so that it isn't done well, but recognizing that there's an urgency here, that, all the studies show us, we tend to look focused on the number that shows that Latinos are the highest growing, the largest group. But what we tend to forget is that the other statistic that's showing is that Hispanic young adults are also the group that's disaffiliating faster. So there is an urgency here. So the timeline is that in the spring, the publication of the conclusions are going to be ready to go. That'll include some of these, and then immediately in-services are going to be provided on the Episcopal regional level, and then on the diocesan level. So I know that from the organizer's point of view, it's urgent, and it is a priority, and it's going to address a lot of those things that were in the question, is the intercultural competencies, which already exist, but the Encuentro, if anything, really brought to light how important that is. And even though those intercultural competencies program has been around for quite a few years, too many people still aren't aware.
Thank you. Tom or Angel, did you want to add anything to respond to Charlotte?
I would just say that locally in our parish and the diocesan Encuentro in the Diocese of Brownsville is mobilizing people by putting them together. And so I think one of the fruits of the Quinto Encuentro is just getting people to have this conversation. And so we're just networking, with the few sparse leaders that are doing this well, connecting with the other ones that are doing it in another part of the diocese, and just meeting and having these conversations. So it is more of a grassroots and kind of informal way of how that's happening, but it's beginning to bear fruit in the more formal structure, programmatic way. Mm-hmm. But it is identifying people already doing these things and naming how do we do it better and more intentionally. So.
I would just also add that I thought the modeling of the Encuentro process regarding language especially at the National Encuentro that I had the most experience, where language needs were anticipated. So the materials that are written are available in English and Spanish. The MCs are providing information in English and Spanish. The presenters were going back and forth from English to Spanish, and then there was simultaneous translation provided. I think that when we look at the formation of leaders, that anticipating the language needs is something that we should do well, and there was a lot of good modeling at the Encuentro about that.
That's very helpful too. Thank you. Angel, you mentioned families, and certainly in youth ministry we've learned you can't do good youth ministry if you're ministering only to youth without their families, and I bet you discovered some things about Hispanic families through the Quinto Encuentro. Would you like to share a little bit of that with us?
Absolutely. Some of the most thriving parish ministries and retreat ministries were actively engaging families in the Hispanic communities. But I think it was noteworthy to talk about some of the challenges that Hispanic families were facing. And again, these are generalized summary pieces of what we were finding from the regions altogether, and this, some of the things I'll just share are coming from the 2016 census data. So in the median household income in a Hispanic household income was $55,000, while a white non-Hispanic household income was $77,000. So here we see a significant disparity in just the access to resources within the different households, and this can look different obviously in different parts of the country, but this was the those median numbers. And the other that I thought was important to note was just family size. So you have Hispanic family sizes coming in averaging out at 4.2, and white non-Hispanic family sizes averaging out to 3.4. And so here you're having less money spread over more or larger families, while that can pose real significant challenges to getting them involved in parish youth ministry. So while earlier the parents talked about we want more retreats, more groups, sports, all mission trips, things like that, it's a different type of challenge for Hispanic families to engage in that, and I think it requires us to rethink what that can look like.
And so do you three have any suggestions for how that can look? What should we be doing in parish youth ministry with those, especially those two significant statistics that Angel just identified?
One
I'll,
of the,
sorry.
I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to share one of the kind of the parish experiences that I've had has been to try to keep more again focusing on accessibility, but even to our young people and our families. So I've shared the personal experience where we have a family that wants to get involved. They've been doing the summer softball, they've been doing retreats and all of that all those things, but it's difficult for them because of a fixed or this limited income that they're dealing with. They only have one vehicle to get around, and they're a large family. And so it happens that they say, hey, I'm going to be there, but then it's gas money can be an issue, or just logistically getting down the street to that lock-in going on at a neighboring parish is a challenge. So accessibility and moving people and or keeping things local are part of the considerations that we make. We can't think of our young people as mobile as maybe other groupings, or we have to kind of think that all the way through, because sometimes we only think of the kind of the day event start to finish, and here we kind of have to make sure that we can even get people to these, and sometimes even physically. So
I was going to recommend also that when we do start planning, what does our youth ministry look like, especially with Latinos, really maybe start looking at them as family, of things that they can do as a family. For everything that Angel just said, absolutely. But also it's about trust. And most Latino families, it takes them longer. They need to have a relationship with the leader a lot longer and deeper before they're ready to let their children go off on a weekend retreat. So even in those instances where, people are blessed that economics is not an issue, they still need to have really know you and have a relationship with the leader. I remember not being allowed growing up for sleepovers. That just did not happen.
Yeah.
Unless my parents knew the family I was going to, which meant they had been to our home. So that's a whole other aspect. As youth minister, you may even need to intentionally build into your ministry having coffee, or just going to these homes instead of expecting them to always just come to the parish or whatever it is that you are going to gather.
That's a good point. Thank you. Thank you so much. Our last topic, and then we'll go into our hopes, is on the spirituality of. Oh, Angel, did you have any other things that you wanted to share about the impact?
Well, I was just thinking that, again, we need to think about the access. We need to think about what they can look like to keeping people at home. I'd affirm what Marilyn was talking about with visits. I mean, locally in our area, we've seen that to be very, very successful. One of the diocesan directors, when she was a parish catechetical leader, made it a point to visit every family of the parish community within 2 years. And so she sat in their homes to pray with them, to learn about what they were going through. And again, it's what Marilyn's describing is building trust, but it's also that accompaniment Tom was describing, that going out. And yeah, it takes time. But I mean, to this day, my dear friend says that this is one of the most rewarding experiences that she's ever had, was to go out and to do that. And I can share with you, just kind of logistically, it is so much easier to do things as a family because you're having a middle schooler and a grade school child and one kind of a young adult. Like, if we could just think of how to do ministry less in silos, and more kind of comprehensive and just mindful of who's coming. How do we help young people pray with their family and do that? I think that would go a long way. So
yeah.
And I'm sorry, Joan. I had one more thing that Angel just reminded me of. Family catechesis is something that came really loudly as a recommendation so far from the Encuentro, is just doing catechesis as a family. And I know that in youth ministry, we don't tend to think of in youth ministry that we're doing intentional catechesis, and certainly as a family. But I think that's an area in youth ministry we need to really look at that, and what is it going to look like?
Yeah, I was just going to share from more from my perspective of volunteering in youth ministry, especially when Lois was a parish youth minister in a very culturally diverse community, and then even here at our local parish, that whole, just hopping on to what Marilyn was talking about, the building the relationship, or what I kind of share about is spending FaceTime. So it's face to face. How is it we're spending time with the families, but also just thinking about youth ministry as ministry with youth and their families. And then for some of us who feel like maybe, that's harder for us to do, maybe I don't speak Spanish, but finding those gente puente, finding those people who are the bridge people. One of the things that I've experienced is that within the Hispanic community, there's a strong networking of families. And so especially when something chimes a bell, like when something actually speaks to a need of families, there are people in the parish, when they know about it, then everybody knows about it. And you don't have to send out the email. They all know about it because they're connected to each other. And so how is it that we find a way to get to know those networks and to learn from them and change what we're doing because of that? Because it's a mutual transformation. I think that's what a relationship implies. And I think it's about building that relationship with families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to share that, given some of the things that we talked about, and again, how to embrace and share the giftedness within the families, I think is to consider that the giving of time, talent, and treasure, and that the tithing in a Hispanic context can more often look like the giving of time and talent, and so it's how do we help people do that and share that. So.
That's awesome. Angel, your face is frozen, but your words were powerful.
I hope.
And I think that part of what us Gente Puente can do is also then let the other side of that translate to them that talent and treasure. So that talent and time does translate into treasure. And I think that sometimes we do what might sound really obvious to some of us isn't so obvious. But if you have, the group of women who before the Easter Vigil or Midnight Mass, they volunteer to go in there and they will scrub that church, and from head to toe. Well, I just haven't had to pay an outside agency. Guess what? That does translate into treasure. But I think sometimes we need to be the prophetic voice to just point that out.
Absolutely. That's a good example, too. A real one. Angel, what would you say about what you heard and have experienced, of course, but what did the Quinto Encuentro say about the spirituality of young Latinos?
Absolutely. So, there was a very palpable sense of how the Hispanic families, Hispanic young people are expressing their faith, and so that was something experienced through all the different settings and levels of the Quinto Encuentro. But I think it's a lived experience that happens in our parishes, in these ministries and apostolates, and I think it's a way of embracing that. One of the recommendations I'd make for helping to incorporate this spirituality into the lived experience of the parish culture is to look at how the popular devotions that Hispanic families embrace, like the Via Crucis and the Posadas, and all these other devotionals around Our Lady of Guadalupe or Dia de los Muertos, can be rooted in community, rooted in family, relationships, experience, and encounter. And they're also so sensory rich with music and food and colors. And it's something that, when we talk about what young people, our youngest generation of people are looking for in our millennials and Gen Z, it speaks to that. And I think it's something that we can leverage and use as a fruit and a gift for the larger U.S. church, and it's something that we can embrace all together.
Tom,
I would agree, Angel. I'm sorry.
Please,
I think that one of the gifts that Latinos can bring to the church is this sense of what we call mística, which I've yet to really find a word to word translation. If you have one, Angel, I would love to then borrow it, because it really speaks to us that as Latinos with the faith, there seems to be more of an openness to what I'm going to call the supernatural nature of it. And I think that we can all benefit from that. So, so the way that we pray, it's with our bodies and it is, all the senses, like you said. But I think it's also with this, and I don't even know we've articulated in words, but just in the way that we live it out, that this sense of the supernatural is very real to us. That it's just something that surrounds, how we look at our God and how we practice the faith. And I'd like to see that is a gift that we can bring.
Definitely a gift. Tom, what would you add to that? How
I actually, Angel has a picture he can share as he advances the slides. I was going to tell a little story of my own parish. For years and years, as we belong to this parish, as we enter the vestibule of the church, Our Lady de Guadalupe has been on the left-hand side with the row of candles. And then, the week before I was leaving for the Encuentro, I walked into the sanctuary of our church in our worship space, and Our Lady had moved from the vestibule to the sanctuary. And I was able to capture this picture. You saw the family that's walking away from the candles. They had just lit the candles together, and Our Lady is looking at Christ, the role of Mary. She's pointing to Christ and telling us that that's where our discipleship comes from. I think I feel like that our parish has to change a lot more to really welcome the community that is forming, and I think our church needs to do that too. But I think that this has to do with allowing the spirituality of the Hispanic community to shape us and to open our hearts to that, so that the joy and the vibrancy would be something. And this the word I was thinking about was the mystery and the awe, and I guess towards the mystica, not the over intellectualizing of faith, but allowing the faith to be something that we can stand humbly and acknowledge that we don't understand. And I think that's what I'm hoping for in terms of the spirituality. The other thing I would add would be this recognition that faith, family, and culture are these threads that are woven together and together are very strong, and that we would acknowledge that, and to see culture and family and the spirituality of this community to be something that really shapes and forms all of us, and to not accentuate differences, not try to do a lot of how do we make everything fit together into neat and categories, but to maybe stand a little bit more in awe of that as well. I did want to speak to something I experienced at the Encuentro of the lay and clergy partnership. Right from the beginning of the Encuentro, the bishop delegations walked into the celebration with a bishop next to a lay person who had been instrumental in that community coming to the Encuentro. And it was a contrast to other celebrations I've been to, that is a gathering of bishops, that this was the partnership was there. And then I would also say the healing relationship of the Hispanic community towards the bishops. I was with one of the bishops, Bishop O'Connell from Los Angeles, 2 weeks later for our board meeting, and he spoke of that, and I noticed it at the time. He said for many of us as bishops, we felt healed by the love that we felt. And I was talking to Angel about it, and maybe you'd speak more to this, but one of the things he was explaining as I noticed this is like there was a genuine love for the bishops that transformed them from being hesitant to really embracing the event, in my experience. And Angel shared that it's the way a mother loves a child. You're my son, no matter what you do, I will always love you. Now, later comes the good scolding. But so it's not, that was the key that Angel helped me to understand. It's not a naive relationship like, oh, you can do whatever. It's we love you and your family, and we expect you to be family. So there's an accountability in that relationship. I think the Church of the United States needs to learn and lean into that in this moment when we're trying to be new. In the way that we organize ourselves as church, in response to the abuse, but also the response to this moment of evangelization. I think the spirituality of the Hispanic community is key to that.
Thank you. Oh, wow. That's very powerful and just so hopeful, and what a gift. Before I give each of our panelists a chance to give their hope for the future, Susan, do we have any questions?
Not really. Let's see, a question. One of them, what you're going to answer anyway, about whether or not this webinar is available afterwards. But then there was also someone who was just sort of reiterating what you said, that there were occasions when young adults who are fourth and fifth generations were discouraged from participating in the parish Encuentro process. So just reiterating what you all had said earlier.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And everyone, yes, that we are recording this and it will be available. Angel will be notifying all of you of how you can get that, so don't worry about that. I'd like to invite each of the three of you to give as a last comment, what is your hope? We're only 50% there, Marilyn said. So what's your hope for the next 50%? What would you like to share, Marilyn?
I get, definitely my hope is that what this will help build is a church certainly that's more welcoming, more missionary in nature, that we're going to really focus on building communities through an ecclesial integration and not thinking that we're siloing. And I actually would say that my other hope, speaking as a Latina Catholic, is that I'm very much aware that there are other very fast-growing immigrant groups from the different Asian countries and the different African countries.
Mm-hmm.
So my hope would be that the need to have these consultations on the topics, we may not have to have that one same conversation over and over again, so that when our other brothers and sisters, they are here, we already have the models in place
Mm-hmm.
to continue being church as we should be church, and that we don't always have to go back to the drawing board.
Wow.
That's a significant implication for all of us to keep in mind. Thank you. Tom and Angel?
Well, I would share that I think a really important thing from the Encuentro process would be for us to each look at this from our own purview as leaders. I was very challenged by a dear colleague who said to me as we were trying to embark on a new project, he said, Tom, speaking of the Center for Ministry Development and the ministry that we're a part of, he said, don't let anyone tell you that these aren't your people. He says these are, and I think that's what the bishops were telling us in the intercultural competencies, that it's about us as leaders having the ability, the humility, and the skills to be able to exercise our leadership in a way that truly includes and responds to a church it's not a congregational church, it's a geographic church. So the bishop's responsible for all the souls in the diocese, the pastor's responsible for all the souls within the parish, the youth minister is responsible for all of the young people in your community, and they are your people, and that's a responsibility to get to know them and their families, and then to figure out how to respond and how to maybe let go of some of your hold on leadership to share that, so that people have access to what they need. So I think it's that sense of how is it that we embrace with humility and do what we can do to really move forward.
Angel, how about you? What implications or hope do you carry forward?
Sure. Well, the image that you have on the slide is that of peach trees because of Bishop Cantu's address talking about the spiritual tumbleweeds, so not being of shallow fruits, but then also of the fruits. He was speaking tend to the roots and the fruits. How do we be mindful to that? And I would wish that and hope that moving forward as we continue this pastoral process of the Quinto Encuentro, be challenged to think of how do we tend to the roots and the fruits of this, and to really stretch our understanding of what a leader in youth ministry, in pastoral juvenil, looks like. That it's more than, we definitely need to advocate for budgets and staffing and structures, but to affirm all the wonderful things already being done and to nurture that. So we, like Tom talked about, there's just a tenacity that young adults and families were living out in overcoming all these obstacles. They couldn't meet at the parish. They don't have the resources. They didn't have, Father wouldn't support them in this or that, or the parish pastoral leader wouldn't do. They still got it done. They were doing bake sales. They were still, doing retreats. They were hosting them in their homes, and there was this creative ingenuity and tenacity to going about living their ministry and sharing the faith and bearing these fruits. And I wish that the structural church, the hierarchy, the organizational structure would affirm and better resource and equip and serve as a catalyst for this change, because a lot of this doesn't need to be redesigned or thought up. It's already happening in many areas of the country, and it's rather just acknowledging it, affirming it, and as we've named, using it as a model for others to follow suit. So
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I see we've reached the end of our time. I especially want to thank you, Marilyn, since you're at the bishop's meeting right now, for taking the time to be with us. So our prayers go with you and our bishops. Susan, any last questions?
Nope. Just a thank you from some folks.
Great, yes. And that's certainly, we want to thank all of you for participating with us today. And I especially want to thank Marilyn and Tom and Angel for sharing their experience and their wisdom with us today. So God bless all of you, and thank you so much from CMD.
Wonderful. Thank you all. God bless you.
Bye.